And the struggle that our ancestors faced back in 1969 when we started is the same struggle that we're facing today. And the only thing that we can do now is protect the future from having to live in the same way that we are. And that's only going to be done when more of our people from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the BC Assembly of First Nations, for the First Nations Summit, all Indigenous organizations hold space for those individuals like my young self as that little girl to learn how to use our voice, because that wasn't given to many of us. And if we had just known that there was somebody out there fighting for us, then maybe there would be more socioeconomic advantages for our people. We just understand what opportunities arise or who is there to lend a helping hand. That's how we create the change that's needed. I believe it's the inherent strength. Us as Kwamo Shlady, the women of the land, have always been so strong. It starts in the womb. We're just made to survive. Unfortunately, within the settler colonial institutions' imposition on these rules and these societal norms, we're just forced to survive. But even before that, before all of that, before colonization, us as Kwamo Shlady, as women of the land, we're matriarchs. That's who we are. And that comes with the responsibility that states that we have to protect. We have to guide. We have to ensure the safety of others. We have to ensure all people are loved, respected, and are treating each other kindly. That's where it comes from.
I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. Welcome back to Behavior Speak, and welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Katisha Paul. In part 1, we explored Katisha's personal journey, from her childhood experiences and the challenges she faced growing up, to the moment she found her voice and began using it to advocate for others. It was a conversation about survival, healing, identity, and resilience. Today, we turn our attention to the work. We dive into Indigenous sovereignty, environmental stewardship, women's leadership, youth advocacy, international organizing, and the responsibilities Katisha carries as a leader within her community and on the global stage. We also discuss the teachings of her ancestors, the importance of ceremony and protocol, and why she believes the future depends on moving from intergenerational trauma towards intergenerational excellence. So let's jump back into the conversation with Katisha Paul. You once shared that our backbones are like cedar because we use cedar for everything. Can you tell me about that teaching?
It starts with our roots. So you look at the cedar trees, and of course they go down below the ground, and oftentimes they have their partners with them. So there's the male and the female, and they'll stand close together, and their roots intermingle, and the roots talk with the fungi that are living around them, and the fungi tell them when to release certain spores to protect them from certain rains or thunder or any external harm that may come about them. And they talk to each other. The trees, they talk to each other. The cedar tree has always been a main part of our culture. I mean, you could see in the background all of our hats, and they provide us with everything that we need. Our clothing, our transportation through our canoes, our big houses. They give us the spirit of the fire. They protect us in every which way possible. And that is a life lesson all on its own. The cedar tree gives up their life for the human being. So the best that we can do in return, when we talk about reciprocity, is to be able to hold ourselves up as strong as that cedar tree, no matter what we're faced with, and be as strong as that cedar tree. Hold our backbones in the same form, and also give ourselves up in every form. Be diverse. Think about how diverse our cedar trees are through those canoes, with our clothing, with our housing, with our shelter, with our ability to create beautiful artwork through our masks. And its branches give us all of the medicine that we need. The cedar tree alone is an entire law that we have to live by.
One of my favorite things that you said when we met was, I don't have to tell people when I'm in ceremony with them. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Earlier, I was talking about the ways that we weave in our protocols.
Yes.
And for us as Coast Salish people, our protocols are sacred to us. Actually, many of our protocols are secret. But that's not to say that we don't live those protocols out every single day of our lives. It starts with the way in which we interact with each other, the way in which we honor people and invite them to a table, to share in a meal, to share in conversation, to share in song and dance and languages. That in itself is a Coast Salish protocol, a law that we live by. And it's these certain aspects that I weave into the protocols that I use with the work that I do when I call people for a meeting. It's not to say I believe that when I call on, let's say, Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, that I believe he's going to be higher than me in stature when we sit down across the table from each other. For myself, when we live out our protocols as First Nations peoples in these meetings, it means that we're equal too. And I use this as a way to relax myself, because working in this world of politics, having to lobby against these major corporations that are just wanting to destroy our earth for a couple of dollars in their pocket that aren't even thinking about future generations, you can see how that is harmful on the mind, and it can become quite damaging to the soul and to the spirit. But I've come to an understanding that if I integrate my own culture and protocols into the way that I work, it allows me to be guided by my ancestors in a respectful way, but also it teaches settler colonial institutions an alternative form of governance. And sometimes that's uncomfortable for people. There was actually, sorry, one moment. Years back, I was working for the Ministry of Attorney General, and I get called for a meeting. And it was with a reconciliation action team. We sat down for the meeting, and it was my first week on the job, so I have no idea who these big wigs are. And I was told that I was going to lead the meeting. So I led the meeting. Mind you, I'm maybe 22 at the time, and I assert my sovereignty as a First Nations woman on Coast Salish land in Esquimalt, Victoria, to tell these non-Indigenous peoples how we're going to run the meeting. And I said, okay, what we're going to do is you're all going to explain who you are, where you're coming from, how long you're going to stay, what your intentions are, and what you're going to give to us. That's not a land acknowledgement. That's our protocol. I was too assertive. Apparently there was some executive director in the space, and he wanted to actually take me off of the reconciliation action team because he didn't enjoy the way that I asserted our sovereignty, even in the simplistic form of needing to go a certain way in a circle to introduce yourself rather than going clockwise, you go counterclockwise. It wasn't inviting. It wasn't welcoming to change. And when we talk about the ways that we need to integrate our indigenous ways of knowing, being, seeing, and doing, when we need to incorporate our own Kwamok Snow Wyeth, our own teachings, our own laws, and our protocols into the governing systems, it's not going to happen. At least it's not going to happen easily without unity. And that's about allowing people from distinct nations to practice these types of protocols in governing systems without any backlash, without any question, without any harm, and without any critique. Is that happening right now? In some spaces, yes. But in others, there is work that has to be done. There's more work to be done to allow our knowledge systems to be interwoven, to respect each other. That's what's lacking, is one of our other greatest laws of respect and honor. You respect and honor a First Nations person or a First Nations leader when you approach them in the same way you would approach a queen or a king or a prime minister. Right now, our chiefs are going through major issues of their own, facing crises left, right, and center within all of our nations back home. And they're doing an amazing job at doing this. I hear of chiefs that are waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning to emergencies and getting on it. I heard of chiefs that are taking their radios and running off against all advice into a fire zone to ensure that another chief and their people have the understanding that a fire is on their way. These people are heroes. Our chiefs are so loving, kind, honest, and respectful. And they deserve to be respected. Unfortunately, we're running into a situation where when one of our elected chiefs or hereditary chiefs are calling a meeting with government, they're being met with a staff member from a ministry, not even a minister, let alone meeting with the prime minister. And that is a form of disrespect. A form of disrespect that could be solved if there was just an understanding of the dignity and pride that we put into our own governing structures, our own self-determining ways of protocols, knowing, being, and seeing as First Nations peoples, that has to be seen on par, if not higher, than the imposed settler colonial institution or governing structures.
Yeah. Tell me about your current role with the union.
I used to be the youth representative for 3 years, and I love the position because I was afforded the ability to sit at the table. And I still have the same capabilities. I am now the women's representative for the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and I have a vote at the chief's table in the same way that a chief does on all resolutions, on all decisions that are being made. I could amend anything that I want. I can strike anything that I want. I get to sit around a table with our leadership who are making the decisions alongside each other and be inspired by their unity and their pride in who we are as Coast Salish people, as Interior Salish people, as Northerners. And we have the ability to really sit down and listen to what our great First Nations organizations around BC are doing. I have the opportunity to listen in on the work of FNESC or the work that's being done for the BC First Nations Justice Council, listening in on conversations about the whole process of the long-term reform for the jurisdiction over children and families, hearing presentations on the ways in which our land guardians are doing the best that they can do within the systems that we are working within to protect our land and our water and our air for our future generations. And as the woman's representative, I can feel a shift. A shift that is telling me that I have more responsibility. And I welcome that, always. And sometimes having to be met with challenging discussions surrounding missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S+ peoples, or gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, as the woman's representative, there's healing that has to be done. not just for those that are working for our women, but for the women themselves, our women that are survivors or the families of survivors of these great harms. And the healing occurs when we begin to have a paradigm shift from intergenerational trauma to the celebration of the intergenerational excellence. We are life givers.
Mm-hmm.
We are the ones who hold love and kindness in our spirit to be shared with others. And when our women are harmed, it's been noted throughout history that when you take power away from women, suddenly there's a downfall in society. And this isn't just by mistake that this has happened. What I'm realizing in this role as the woman's representative is the systemic harms that occur for our women. I go for meetings with the National Women's Leadership Council. And in those meetings, I can sense a sense of hesitancy on, what do you think the rest of the chiefs are going to say? How are we going to move? What are we going to do? But we just do it. We're matriarchs. We have the inherent responsibility to make these decisions on our own accord, because that was what was afforded to our ancestors, but taken away during settler colonial rise of their own governing structures and their imposition of these laws that state that women don't have rights. Women can't vote. Women can't pass down their indigeneity to their children. So you harm the woman. You take away their rights. You tell them they have to ask permission to gather and to move and to create change. And on top of that, we're being killed. We're being slaughtered. We're being cut into pieces. We're being thrown into dumpsters, never to be found again. And then our families don't have any funding to be able to go and find our sisters, our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, our cousins. Well, at that point, you get very discouraged. The good thing about Indigenous women is that we will continue to rise.
Your work with the United Nations has taken you into spaces where you're representing Indigenous youth and Indigenous women on an international stage. When you first walked into those rooms, what surprised you?
I felt so alone my first year that I went to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. So scared, shaking in my moccasins, because there was just nobody that I thought was from home in these spaces. And then I heard my language being spoken. As I was trying to look for a conference room to go into, I heard it. And I nearly broke down in tears, because I just needed a piece of home for my heart and my spirit to continue that advocacy at the international level. And I was feeling so discouraged. I didn't see anybody that was Coast Salish. I didn't see anybody that was, really from BC. There's a delegation that goes that is from BC, but outside of that, I didn't feel that I could connect to anybody. Luckily enough, though, Lorna Williams was speaking in the hall. I can hear her. And to hear somebody just simply say, "Kukstumka," just like, "thank you," was enough to inspire me to keep on going. And what I'm noticing is that there was a sense of naivete on my own part, thinking that, I was doing something so big, and it was this whole new thing of international travel for Indigenous peoples. And that was proven to me to be wrong so quickly within that first year, because I heard stories of our great leaders from BC who traveled over to New York and over to Geneva to do the same thing that I was doing, but decades ago, even before the UNPFI existed, before the expert mechanism on Indigenous rights existed. There has been ongoing international work for our people. And to be a part of that is amazing. To listen to the stories in different languages about how it is that we have to protect her, our earth, is so heartwarming, because I listen to relatives that are over in New Zealand or down in Guatemala or over in Europe, our Sápmi relatives, and they're talking about their interactions with her and the waterways and her veins that are used to transfer our salmon and our fish and our livelihood. And it's like I'm listening to my own uncles or aunties tell these stories when we're on the floor speaking these interventions at these large international forums, because they're telling the same stories of these interactions, which totally makes sense because we're people of the land. I meet people of the land and water and air at these international forums, and a lot of the time you ask them where they come from, and they'll tell you, and they'll give the translation in the same way that I gave you in the beginning of this meeting to state this is actually what this word means. And it's the relationship that we carry on from our land, and the responsibility that we have to her is stated in the reminder of the land title that we use. So being in those forums, having the understanding that we are just all fighting in the same struggle together, creates a sort of certainty, a structure that allows us to use our voices together. And our young people are so amazing. I have so many great relationships that I've built with our young Indigenous leaders throughout the world who are so resilient. They are the ones that are facing horrible hate crimes, running away from war, never able to return back home. You know, they have their languages fully extinguished, militarization on their lands. And despite all of this, we have the ability to gather together and share these stories. But in the same sense that we have the same struggle or the same interaction and relationship to the land, water, air, and our relatives, because those are all exactly the same, no matter where it is that you come from, well, add a layer of who colonized you. And oftentimes you have the same issues arise. Now, going into these international spaces, I get to listen to all of these solutions to the same settler colonial mechanisms that are holding us down. And I get to find different solutions that maybe we haven't used yet in certain nations. And rather than the historic trade routes that we used to use, we're now using those same historic trade routes for not just tangible items, but for transfer of knowledge that allows us to unify our voices internationally. And that is the responsibility of our young people now in these spaces, is to hold on to those key messages and continue sharing, because we have the energy to. We have the energy to get up and fight together and unify our voices and our messaging, not just for one ecosystem on one side of the world, but as we understand it, everything is connected. Natamat Mestimuch, one heart and one mind. And that message all on its own, Natamat Mestimuch, is said time and time again in hundreds of different languages at these forums, stating the same law.
What was that like the first time you heard an Indigenous voice from another land sharing such similar perspectives and experiences that you had?
I cried. I'm a really emotional person, and I can feel people's energies especially when there's giving us these messages. And there was this man who said, our voices will carry through the wind across the world so you can hear the cries of our people.
Yeah.
Now, every time I go outside and I feel wind, I'm reminded of those cries of those people. And then I think, oh gosh, what can I do about it? How can I help? How can I not echo these problems that people are having, but how do I find the ability to allow them to amplify their own voices in their own struggles so we can all help each other? It's those key messages when we hear people saying the same laws that are derived from the land that really signify true ability to change. Because the land, she's telling us these messages over and over and over again. The return of the salmon, the return of the killer whale, the eruption of these volcanoes, the shifting of the tectonic plates to allow for these major earthquakes to occur. Well, sometimes when the salmon run away and don't return back to our streams, we have legends that tell us that that is simply a result of human misbehavior. Now, that to me, you look at a national scale and we hear these messages from all Indigenous peoples. It's not a one-off occurrence. This is the behavior of a woman who is living. Our earth is living. And all around us, we can feel her movement. We can sense the messages that come through the air from other Indigenous peoples that exist on the other side of the world, who have their own ancestors, who have their own legends that tell them exactly how you have to interact with the earth, with the water, with the wind, and with your relatives, whether they're walking, flying, crawling, or two-legged. They're such simply beautiful messages that we get that state our responsibility, our laws, our protocols. And it's not just here. If you have any relation to the land at all, you'll understand the impact of something as detrimental as a pipeline to our systems as a whole, because we are all connected. But if you don't have that connection, if you refuse to listen to the messages in the wind, or the messages in the water when the salmon don't return, or the messages from the trees when they're no longer giving those messages to the mushrooms, well, you just don't have your eyes open to recognize the harm that that's going to do to the entire system as a whole. And we say we have to be witnesses. We're witnesses to the work. Whether that work is the work of the earth or the work of the humans around us, we're witnesses to what we are doing now, the action that is being taken, the inaction that is being taken, nationally, globally, regionally.
As co-chair of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, you've helped bring together Indigenous youth from many nations around the world. What have those conversations taught you?
Listening to our young leaders that come from all over, the one message always arises that young Indigenous peoples are not the leaders of tomorrow. We are leading the way today.
And tell me a little bit more about the caucus, what the work it does, and kind of how you got involved.
So the first year that I go to the UNPFII, I get introduced to this amazing group of young leaders, and they invite me to a morning caucus. And I go over, and what we do every single morning before each of the large meetings for the forum is excuse me, we gather, we communicate about what resolutions are happening or what interventions, what the topics are covering. And I learned that the GIYC actually coordinate in their messages. So they develop up to 4 different interventions on behalf of the GIYC that collaborate all Indigenous youth voices from around the 7 socioeconomic regions into one intervention that states exactly what unified messages each of these Indigenous peoples from each of these regions are wanting to state on the floor, whether that's for environmental protection, women's rights, youth justice, education, you name it. They have great recommendations every single year, and the ability for them to connect to each other and unify their voices and agree on, let's say, 4 recommendations per intervention is phenomenal. You can't get some of our older leadership to agree on one single recommendation and how to move that forward, but our youth are so willing to work together with that one heart, one mind. And the GIYC, what they do is they help nominate somebody who's going to speak on their behalf for each of these interventions that are co-developed between the regions. So one person is able to go up and speak on the behalf of the GIYC, and they do that repetitively for each of those interventions that they develop. And throughout the year, the focal points and the co-chairs get to communicate with all of those that are within the GIYC, who is really just a whole bunch of organizations or individuals of Indigenous youth who are motivated by change, motivated by action, or rather forced to change the world or forced to generate action. And they help connect us as young people to these major organizations globally. So whether that's any of the UN agencies or any of the non-delegated agencies or any of the major states that are throughout the world, and we get to voice our recommendations further than just at the table for the UNPFII. And so early on, I recognized during that first meeting for the forum that I had to become a focal point in order to become a co-chair the next year. So me being me, I'm determined, and I found out that that's what needed to happen in order for me to become a co-chair, which is ultimately what I wanted. So that way I can have a little bit more ability to help on an international stage within a greater position than my user position, kind of furthering that internationally. And I ran and I was successful in that election. Moving forward to the next year, I knew exactly what I wanted. And as soon as somebody questioned if that was what I was intending to do, wanting to run for the co-chair, I said yes. They nominated me for that position. And then the same thing happened the next year. And what I'm noticing is that all we need as young Indigenous peoples is the space to thrive, to live, and to voice what it is that we need and what we want in order to survive. And so within this time frame that I've been working for the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, or rather volunteering with the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, it's really about those youth who show up to these forums for their first time. The ones who we have an understanding that may never have the opportunity to return. And it's about giving them the experience of a lifetime while still maintaining that what we're doing there in that short time frame is not going to create the change that we want or expect. It's about setting realistic expectations for the work at the international level, working within these bureaucratic processes and this red tape that we're dancing in and out of, that we have to tell these young Indigenous leaders. So the GIYC, we have the opportunity to share that. We have the opportunity to share the lived realities of what it's like to push forward recommendations on a policy that has never changed since the first time an Indigenous person has stepped foot in a UN agency or an international forum. It's about letting people know that places like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and United States did actually refuse to accept the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, even though Canada is viewed as being such a progressive place. It's these forums that we live out now that we're able to state the lived realities of implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And for our young people, it's a great place to learn about the implications of these decisions that are made internationally and how they trickle down into the systems that we're living in locally, regionally, and nationally. We have these great expectations out of our Canadian representatives or out of our state representatives internationally for our Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Sometimes they don't live up to those standards. And when I say sometimes, it's very little, because what I witness and what we all witness as the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus is that we can give out so many recommendations for years in a row and still see the states regurgitating the same lame messages that they've been giving for decades, that we recognize Indigenous rights. They're there. You have them. You have had them. Congratulations. It's the same form as the land acknowledgement. And what those symbolic gestures do is further harm our interactions with the greater societies that we're living in as Indigenous peoples. So for our Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, having a ability to sit down and really hear about these interactions between state, NGOs, Indigenous peoples organizations, and Indigenous peoples together creates a sense of pride in the struggle. In the same pride that I get when I get to sit around a table with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, I feel the same sense of dignity and strength within the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, simply because we are people of the land, unifying voices together and just wanting to do better than the last generation, so that way we can protect the future generations. Well, that to say, we understand that change is slow. And what we're realizing is that these forums that we're attending that are dedicated to Indigenous peoples are not actually being fully guided and directed by Indigenous peoples. It's still a colonial settler institution that is hammering down laws. We got kicked out of our main forum room at the UNPFII this year from C4 on the UN headquarters into a smaller space that literally kicked Indigenous peoples out of the seat to be able to speak about what is happening on their own lands. And so what we really need is to be able to gather together fully as Indigenous peoples without the implications and harms of settler colonial institutions and lead the way and gather our hearts and our minds together on our own terms, not within the spaces set within the United Nations or any other institution that is non-Indigenous. The shift that we're having, in the same form as the paradigm shift from intergenerational trauma to intergenerational excellence, it's the shift from being dependent on systems to self-determination and self-governance. But what does that mean? How far do we go in jurisdictions in order to enact our rights? It's the enactment of our laws that we have to be able to share with others globally for an understanding that at some point, our Indigenous peoples will have full control over the economy that we are living within. So in order to boost our economy as Indigenous peoples globally, we make those connections at a international level without institutions being the middle person to state that's impossible, because it's not impossible. It's only impossible because of a fear from institutions on our ability as First Nations peoples to actually be self-determining and self-governing. This barring of the enactment of our rights is only happening out of fear.
In addition to all of the incredible things you're doing internationally, you're also involved in a lot of climate work. You're on the BC Assembly of First Nations Climate Leadership Committee. You're involved with ICLEI, First Nations South of 60 committee member. I think a couple others in there as well. Tell me about your passion for climate work and where that came from and some of the things you're involved in.
Earlier, I stated that I used to go out and run away from the family for a bit, enjoy my time, and simply sit under a tree. And I would pay attention. I would look up, figure out which birds were around, feel which way the wind was going, understand what insects were around me, what was harmful, what was not harmful, how roots interacted with each other, what animals were not going to come near me, what animals were. I've always loved the ocean as well. I mean, that's where we get all of our food from. Our people say, once the tide goes out, dinner's ready. Well, we're looking out at the tide and no food is on the table. So I want to be able to protect our young people from scarcity. I want to be able to learn how to go out clam digging or be able to teach my children how to play a salmon. But I can't do those things if those beings, our relatives, don't exist anymore. They gave their lives up for us. Our salmon, the sea urchin, at some point the whales, the sea lions, they gave their lives up for us. All for us to simply make decisions, selfish decisions, to line the pockets of billionaires rather than sustain their livelihood. And so my drive, my passion to protect our earth really comes from the need to experience our earth and what that means for our people. I understand that when you go out cedar harvesting, you're also learning the language. You're learning about responsibility, and therefore you're learning about our culture. Well, if there's no more trees to harvest, then there's no more ability to transfer languages and transfer our cultures and sustain our livelihood. This is seen so many times, and it was done systemically as well. When we were removed from our lands, brought over to reserves, or when our children were removed from those reserves and then brought over to a residential school that was far off land away from their home, well, then you have a disconnect in culture. And now we're living in a time when so many people are reconnecting. And this is happening because of the disconnection that we have from our land, from our waters, from our relatives that are four-legged, finned, winged, and those that have two legs. The way that we interact with each other matters. The way that we interact with each other matters. And I mean that when I say each other, not just us as human beings. It's the way that we interact with the water, the way that the water interacts with the rocks along the shores, the ways in which the trees interact with the water coming down that is trickling from the tops of the mountains into the mouths of the river. All of those create life in our whole entire existence. It creates our laws. It tells us our languages and our cultures. And if we don't have the ability to even witness the work of the earth, then who are we?
A lot of this is about systems. And in addition to the climate work, you've done a lot of work in women's justice, youth justice, diversion, glad you writing. What have those experiences taught you about how systems actually work?
First, to clarify, I don't do the Gladue writing. I'm a strategic advisor for the BC First Nations Justice Council, but I do a lot of work surrounding women's justice and youth justice. And what I'm realizing in terms of systems is that they're all working against each other. And to no fault of their own, except it's the ones that are developing these structures and within these institutions that are developing the problem that exists, which is siloing. We think about the world that exists around us that I just described and the interactions that the trees have with the trickling down from the tops of the mountain into the mouth of the river. Well, that's all connected and intermingled underneath an amazing root system that exists in our forests. In the same sense that we're trying to create these systems that determine how it is that humans interact with each other, our systems have to be connected. And that requires communication between those that are leading these systems. But what I'm finding is that people are competing for these funding streams, or people are competing for these policy decisions, and they're all leading towards the same goal for the same people to generate the same impact. But what's occurring is that nobody's talking to each other. And if they do, then it becomes a competition on who's going to get this funding first, or who's going to finish this framework for a action plan, and then an implementation for that action plan, and then a follow-up on how that framework was successful. Well, that system on its own is not working. And that's what's being funded, though. So part of the grander system overall, when we talk about Indigenous rights, women, environmental, youth, education, justice, well, the only things that are currently being funded are the ability to do research and consultation and engagement because of the affirmed right of Article 19 in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is the right to free, prior, and informed consent. Well, that existed prior to. That was determined by Tsilhqot'in. But since that has occurred, so many people are just in the talking stages of getting justice for land, environment, education, women, girls, 2S plus. And there's little being done about the programming and the services. That's the downfall of the systems work, and the need to de-silo is so prevalent more than ever because all of the funding that is being given for programs and services in many of our non-governmental organizations and even our First Nations is being stripped away and then putting into larger pots to then go have another engagement with another nation to say, oh, you have overlapping jurisdiction and therefore we can't help you. Even though they're shared territories. There's all of these problems about needing to put us into these little boxes. And I fear that within one of the larger systems overall within the federal government and BC with the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is that these are still imposed rights. There are basic human rights, but how it is that we actually implement these rights is being determined by the government. So they give us this ability to enact our rights, but it's, let's say, government creates this box. And they say, that's how we're going to implement those rights through this action plan, such as DRIPA or UNDA. Now we're in this box. And then after that, we're going to go forward and ask you how well we implemented your rights for you and give you this formatting sheet with these lines of questions. And we're going to determine what measures of success look like for the implementation of your rights. And then we become the box, and then they check off the box themselves and they say, yay, that's reconciliation. I'm not seeing the dots connecting here. when we have basic human rights set under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which are the same as our inherent rights, which, by the way, are the same as common law because they're also not written down, are being determined by non-Indigenous peoples. Over and over and over again, when we talk about systems, that's part of the system that's not working and requires real structural change. I was in a conversation once with the Speaker of the House, Raj, for the BC Legislative Assembly. And in this conversation, I asked him, do you ever see a third arm of government of First Nations peoples being able to determine legislation in the same form as the current government? He said no. And I get it, because right now, as we stand, that form of structural change, to go that far, to change a settler colonial institution that was developed to break us down, to then do a 180 switch and involve us and have us sitting in that house alongside parliamentarians, they're not going to accept it. We think about systems change. Well, people like Dallas Brody and Danielle Smith are not going to allow that to happen ever. So rather than working within a system that is not for us, a lot of our nations, organizations, Indigenous peoples are just shifting. It's the shift that is necessary to ensure that our right, our birthright, our Chilean, is being practiced in a way that we feel comfortable in a way where we're not being strangled, in a way where women are able to be matriarchs and youth are just able to be youth, as well as being leaders, and our men are our warriors. We are shifting into this ability to have governments that are self-governing and self-determining over their laws and their jurisdiction and the enactment of these laws and jurisdiction in a way that is meaningful, that develops societies that are excelling in all socioeconomic areas. And that, to me, is the epitome of this paradigm shift. The ability to just state, this system is not working for us. We are no longer going to fit in this box, and we are no longer going to chisel away this box to fit our perfect circle. Because we have our own system over here that is clearly working and has worked for generations that we need to return to. And I can't wait to continue to be a part of those discussions, to continue to be a part of that movement that allows us to enact our sovereignty as Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, because the only way we're going to change our systems is if we think they're broken. But they're not broken.
They're working exactly the way that they are intended to.
Katisha, you wear a lot of hats. The last time we spoke, you described yourself as a shapeshifter. And I've thought about that for a bit. But what does being a shapeshifter mean to you?
It means I get to be the weird auntie, turn off my brain, give my one and only brain cell to my 9 siblings and say, take that for a while. Or I can be the woman sitting on a stage explaining our right to pass down our languages or our right to protect the environment from corporate greed. It's the ability for me to shapeshift between various departments and infrastructures and facilities that may have a specific definition of what they want an Indian to be. And I could do that while still asserting my right as a First Nations woman. So it's the shape-shifting that occurs to suit the needs of a system, so far as it allows me to protect our protocols and who it is that we are, and to have the ability to move so fluidly within systems and travel around and speak at these large conferences. I could speak to a room of 1,000 people, or I can speak to a room of one very stern, stuck in their ways conservative MP, in the same form that I could be able to go and sit down with my youngest niece, who is a Tasmanian devil, by the way. She is crazy. And it's just the ability to shapeshift. I don't always have to be on all the time as this person who is fighting just to survive. I love it because I know how to breathe and go and sit with the trees or go sit next to the water, to just allow myself the time to have the wind take away what is not belonging to me. We have these medicines as Kwamok Mistimok that heal our soul, because the work that we do as advocates is not easy. It hurts the spirit so bad. But to be able to shapeshift and use our traditional medicines by the water or at the trees or eating some good food from that salmon, that's the power. That's the power that I harness as a shapeshifter, to not have to give too much of myself. Being a shapeshifter allows me to regenerate my spirit and allow myself to share only what is needed with people who are deserving of that energy. And some people are not deserving of that energy. Some spaces are no longer deserving of our voice. As hard as I fought to be able to get a voice, at moments when I'm faced with somebody who cannot open up their ears and their heart to listen, my shapeshifter vibes turns into silence, because there's no use in some spaces to even try anymore. And that's where you move, you shift, and you take a different path.
Is there a shape of Katisha that very few people get to see?
Yes. Absolutely. It would be my family and my partner who would only see the weirdest aspects of me. And I try to break down my barriers when I'm talking on stages, or when I'm leading a discussion or facilitating, or, working with a whole bunch of youth. I try to be cool. But I can't. It's a part of me that I feel is still a protective barrier that doesn't allow me to just fully breathe into my weird. And sometimes I do, and it has turned out to be a great success. I get the laughs. I get the love from people, and that energy when I'm able to just relax into spaces. But sometimes I just can't, because there's too much that I have to do, too much going on in my brain, too many things that I have to write, too many people I have to talk to, too many places I have to be. And I love it when I can just sit down with a jar of ice cream and daze out to some random movie that is probably brain rotting my own spirit. But it's those moments when I can just relax, that help regenerate me for the next time that I have to shapeshift into a different area that needs my more assertive energy as a young Indigenous leader.
Shapeshifting into another moment that I know was special for you. Last year, you received a phone call from the Assembly of First Nations asking you to travel to receive 61 cultural belongings. Can you tell us a bit, give us a little background on that moment and take us into that moment and what it meant to you personally?
I was getting my nails done, actually. And I almost didn't take the call. Really happy that call didn't go on to voicemail, because I am so good with my words. Like, I consider myself to be great at speaking, but as soon as I got that phone call, and on the other end, the Assembly of First Nations asks me to go on to a delegation of 4 Indigenous youth over to Germany for the day to go and receive items that were held at the Vatican for 100 years, I was speechless. I couldn't form or string together more than 5 words other than thank you and when do we leave? It was a moment that was so hard for me to believe I was a part of, because who knows how long, who knows how our belongings got there. I mean, many of our stories say that women and children were stolen and brought over to the Vatican or brought over to Europe to go live there, die, be slaves. Who knows? A lot of our belongings were taken. Bishops from all around the world stole hundreds of thousands of belongings just for an exhibition for the Pope in 1925. And to be a part of a delegation to bring home 61 of those belongings held a lot of responsibility. And even now it holds a lot of responsibility because they're not home yet. My job is not finished. We were sent over there because we're a part of the next generation of leaders who are going to be responsible for returning the rest of those belongings, not to just the Indigenous peoples of Canada, but we now have a belonging because we set precedents for returning our ancestral belongings to one country. Well, how can we help the other Indigenous peoples globally maintain and gain the same right to do the exact same thing we just did? I was elated. I was scared, because that's a lot of ceremonial responsibility, a spiritual responsibility that is deserving of more space than we could talk about here. And to have that action and that opportunity provided to us as young people in this day and age was phenomenal. But it didn't go out without any bumps or issues. I was so mad when I actually got over to Germany, because the day after we had ceremony with the chief and the national chief, everybody made it out to be this huge event to state that we were going to be able to hold ceremony over in Germany, and we get to see our belongings, and we get to, pray with them and heal them and let them know that they're coming home. When then a couple hours pass, switch over to a different continent, and there was nothing. We weren't able to see our belongings. We weren't able to hold ceremony. It wasn't until we actually landed from Germany over into Montreal that we were able to be close to them at all. The only thing that we were able to do was look at them through a glass when they were on the tarmac. And that hurt me because I did so much preparing spiritually before that, just to breathe into the responsibility to state that this was not just us grabbing some items from a basement and then putting them into another basement. For me, this movement of rematriation was our ability to bring back belongings that we could then hold in our hands and look at and study and then be able to recreate. So I was upset. I advocated really hard the entire trip because we weren't even going to be able to be allowed on the tarmac. And I kept on emailing. I kept on talking to the person who was with us on the grounds from the AFN, kept on bugging them. I brought together the voices of the Indigenous youth to say, hey, this is weird, right? Like we get told that we get to be a part of this delegation to bring back our belongings, but it feels so symbolic. And I'm not okay with anything symbolic. And I fought so hard every day, every night. There was, opportunities for me to speak on interviews and to have the ability to write out my experience as it was actually happening. And those moments when I'm driven by, at that point, rage because of the inability to put action to words, I feel like that's sometimes where I really thrive, is when I'm able to fully express my emotions. And in that moment, I was able to. And I did. I advocated so hard to every level that I could to make sure that we can get onto the tarmac. And even then, oh my gosh, I was so sad because I was on the plane. Everybody was so nice on the plane. It was the nicest Air Canada has ever been to me. I wish I could get that moment back. They were bringing me waters. They were bringing more food. They were asking if I was okay. I got one of those little cloth things, and it was great. Got a little pampering. Am I going to receive that again? No, I can't afford it. But I was also sad in that moment while that was happening, because we were told that we weren't able to be a part of any of the ceremonies on the ground. And it's not even just that we weren't told that. There was zero communication on what that was going to look like.
Wow.
And for me, as somebody who is cultural and who is spiritual, I knew that there was work that needed to be done to our belongings to get them home safe. And because that didn't happen, that hurt me spiritually, and that hurt the other youth, because we recognized that it felt like we were just there for a photo op, to shake somebody's hand and say, thank you. That's not what this work is. The work of rematriation and repatriation is the ability for us to bring back home our ancestors and our belongings that will then be able to share with us the breath of our ancestors. The way that our ancestors' hands moved exists in the belongings that we carried home. So, because of all of the arguing that I did and the advocating, even then, not being told what was going on when we landed, I was upset. And we were walking off the plane. I was already done with the trip. At that point, honestly, I had given up on any ability for us to do anything, except at that time I was still preparing for a speech that I had to do for the press conference that was occurring after we had landed. So I thought we were being chauffeured over to where the press conference was happening. But then they told us to put down our bags once we got off the plane. So I put down my bag, and then they pushed us out a door, and we were suddenly out in the snow and walking along the tarmac, being greeted by the national chief and the rest of the Indigenous delegation, with the Inuit and the Métis representatives alongside national chief. And I was told that somebody was going to sing, like sing us down as we were getting there, and kind of like welcome us and welcome home the belongings, to hold that part of ceremony. But I got down there and like nobody was singing. So myself and my friend Payal, who was also there in the delegation, he's still Coteen, we look at each other and we're just like, yeah, now's the time. So we started singing. And so that was the first point of ceremony that we were able to hold along the entire trip, from Ottawa to Toronto to Germany to back to Montreal. And it was so beautiful. And we stood there for, I don't know how long, over an hour on the tarmac while it was snowing, waiting for all of our belongings to get back on ground, because that was our job. When we get asked to do work as First Nations peoples, our protocol is to get there early, stay for the entire time, and talk. about what we just witnessed.
Hmm.
And that's what we did. So because it was so cold and was snowing, a lot of the Indigenous delegation had actually left after the first 2 boxes of belongings had arrived, and everybody else was moving. I was at the back, kind of like farthest away from the door, essentially, because I didn't want to go in. So farthest away from the door, still next to the plane, outside on the tarmac, waiting for our First Nations belongings to get there, because that's the job that we were asked to do. And as everybody was going inside, I stood my ground. I literally didn't move. Even though I didn't have a jacket, I was cold myself. But, we give parts of ourselves up during these ceremonies for the spirit. And that was what I needed to do, because I needed to hold space to ensure that our belongings were safe from getting in all the way from the Vatican, to make sure they were able to breathe our air again. And so I stayed, and because I stayed, the rest of the youth delegation stayed, and we were actually able to greet down the actual First Nations belongings that came down, because before that, before everybody had left, everybody was able to greet the kayak that came down, and then the Métis belongings, and then the Inuit belongings, but the First Nations belongings were actually some of the last to come down. So we waited patiently, and that's what we're taught, right, in ceremony, is that we just need to be patient and sing. So that's what we did. We stood around, we sang songs, we prayed, and finally, when our belongings got down to the ground, I just started crying, because you can feel the energy that they were bringing. And that was my first point of contact with them, was when they're finally home. And I can just even now feel the vibrations of how happy our ancestors were to have their belongings back home. And to be a part of that was insane. So when we were standing there, we're kind of like, all of us youth were just kind of looking. It's just a box with a whole bunch of plastic around it. That's what we seen on the outside, but we knew it existed within its containers. And one of the other, I believe they were from the Inuit delegation, they looked over at us and they said, "Go ahead, go touch it." And so I ran over and I fully fell onto the box, and I just held tight onto the plastic. I didn't care what I was physically holding on to, but spiritually I knew in there that I was able to pray finally to our belongings that I was just asked to return home and protect. And I apologized to them. I said I was sorry for not being able to be close to them during the entire journey, and not able to see them off before we had started the journey back together, from Germany over to Montreal. And to be able to just simply apologize and say I'm sorry for not holding ceremony properly, really uplifted my own spirit. And from that point forward, I was able to carry out the rest of the work in a good way. So we waited for a while afterwards to make sure that our belongings got back inside safely. And then after that, we were chauffeured, of course, back inside, where we were able to do the press conference and gather together with some very high dignitaries, including the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, another couple of other ministers, the national chief, all of the Indigenous delegations for the Métis and Inuit representatives, and there was even some Catholic bishop representatives in this space. Yeah, it was, and there was maybe 100 people fit into this tiny little room, and we're able to celebrate and talk about what we had just witnessed and this celebration of them returning home. All that to say, though, they're still not home. They may be in Canada, but there's work that needs to be done moving forward now within the repatriation journey, where they have to be further studied, and then each of those items need to be determined on what location within Canada, and furthermore what nation they belong to, so the nation can come and actually get them themselves, or be brought to them directly. That work is still ongoing, and we were able to actually unveil the belongings back in March over in Montreal. Oh, goodness. That was another part of the journey where I was so excited to be a part of. And I mean, at some points, things missed the mark, rather, because there was yet again another lack of ceremony, but it's because of the overlapping and shared jurisdiction over these belongings and the uncertainty that I believe the organizers didn't want to overstep any of the ceremonies. So they allowed us back to be able to actually unveil the full belongings back in some basement somewhere within the museum. And I was at that point like ahead of the line, ready to be the first group in there. And I was wondering what process was going to happen because I had no idea what we were going to be doing. And they didn't tell us. They just said, okay, we're going to go unveil the boxes. And to me, I thought that meant somebody that was like specialized, trained to handle these belongings was going to be doing that work. And then I knew in that moment I needed to be in the space so that way I can sing, I can pray, I can do the work that I needed to do. I can talk to the belongings, talk to the ancestors, just kind of like, stay at our peace. And I got in there and they handed us these gloves. So there was maybe like 6 of us within about 100 people or so who were handed gloves and told that we were allowed to be the ones to take them out of the actual containers themselves.
Wow.
And allow them that first breath. And so it was beautiful. We were picking up arrows, we were picking up carvings, we were picking up other belongings and items. There was this very large, like gorgeous dress that was, of course, handmade, made with leather, made with these beautiful bead adornments all the way along the dress and fringe hanging down. And then there was this little baby dress that I had the opportunity to remove from the box. And I just kind of like, I took the baby dress out of the container and I couldn't help but think how she got there. The pain that must have held simply just to be able to be held by another Indigenous woman again. The spirit of that dress, the one who wore that dress. Where is she now? Where did she go? What happened to her? Why was her dress stuck in a basement in the Vatican? And in that moment, I could fully understand why it is that we were asked to be there. Because anytime you get asked to do something, there's always a reason. You are never accidentally in a space. And in that moment, I felt as though I was there to simply, again, protect the young girl that could have been harmed in that instance. And I handled her with care. I handled her with love and gentleness and kindness and reiterated our laws and our protocols of that respect that is required when handling these belongings. And all I can do throughout the entire time that we were unveiling them was sing and pray, and to hold space for other people to do exactly the same, because there's so many high dignitaries that were in the space experiencing the same thing as us. We've all been a part of this struggle, and to be a part of a celebration together in that sense was a breath of fresh air, because we don't always get to win. Oftentimes we are the ones to lose our children, lose our land, lose our women, lose our rights. But when we get to win back our belongings or get back our land together, that's when we recognize the power of resilience against the struggle.
Wow. Amazing. Pushing to today, tell me about this new organization you started.
Yeah, so it's called NEPENEः. It's essentially exactly what I have been doing for the past decade, except now she is fully formalized. I oftentimes get asked, what do you do? And it's hard to explain. And it takes a long time to explain. We've been talking 2 hours about it.
Yep.
And so NEPENEH is a way for me to provide everybody with the information of what services and products I provide, what speaking abilities I have, what topics I can speak on, what exactly my expertise is in, and how I can help others. We also host on their Sovereignty, which is a amazing platform that I'm currently building that will allow Indigenous voices from across BC and Canada and essentially across the world, whenever I make it to the world forums, to be able to talk about what sovereignty is. So I mentioned earlier that you can't necessarily tell a fisherman how to describe sovereignty. He's not going to tell you. I promise you that. Instead, you're going to learn how to enact sovereignty, what that actually means on the ground. What does it mean when you are a sovereign person capable of going out onto the land, harvesting cedar, and then teaching the next generation below you how to weave a cedar hat? That's sovereignty. Those are our rights, and it's a celebration. I don't want to dwell so hard in the negativity of what we surround ourselves with, because we get enough of that. We come from trauma. But because of that, there are so many things in this world that we can consider a success. And sovereignty is one of those. It's something that those that have not ceded our territories understand. The ones that have signed treaties but have allowed the interwoven laws to be enacted within those treaties to distinguish what it means to be Indigenous within a Canadian society or what it means to be a Hwamuch Mistimuch on our Hachat Tamuch. It's the differences in languages that we're using that allow us to understand that we have not ever been idle. We have always been active. We've always been moving. Even though there's a struggle, sovereignty allows us to tell people around the world that we, while are sovereign, have so much beauty to share. And it's going to be a great honor to sit down with a lot of our knowledge keepers, because that is my intent, in the same form that we are doing now, to really sit down and hear the stories of what it meant to be on the Constitution Express, what it meant to be on the line of fire at Oka, and how it is that we ensure that our our Statlium people could really get back to our roots and live out sovereignty. I want people to feel inspired. I want them to hear the stories of our ancestors and feel the same fire being lit over and over and over again, because we have something here that we must protect. It's our earth, it's our water, it's our relatives. And the only way that we can reignite that flame or wake up the sleeping languages and cultures inside of us is if we just listen and just witness what it's like to live out these words like free, prior, and informed consent, sovereignty, self-determination. To a lot of politicians, these are just words that are in the way of policy and legislation and now major projects. Well, you can't turn down rights if you recognize the beauty of what those rights allot to an entire nation, not just First Nations peoples, because we have a lot to give. And sovereignty is a time to sit down and talk about it, a time for us to think about the action that is necessary to ensure that people know the impact of implementing our rights. Every single time I've sat down with an elder over tea, just to chat, you learn something new that you take home with you and you keep it in your treasure box in your heart. And a lot of our elders are leaving us to go to the other side. This is my way to give back. This is my way to sustain our cultures, our languages, our protocols, so that way not just myself or my family can enjoy the stories of our elders, but it's also the ability to share those stories with individuals who are making decisions about our lands without us, to show them why we need to be a part of these discussions. So essentially, sovereignty is hosted by NEPENEH. NEPENEH, what it means is to be able to share, to be able to teach, and to be able to grow. And that's what I do. As soon as I seen the name, as soon as I heard it, I knew that needed to be the name for my organization, because our names mean everything. Precious sauce, little angel, carries the spirit of who I have to be. NEPENEH carries the responsibility of who I have to be in this working political, socioeconomic world that is separate but still attached to who I am as an individual. It's the responsibility to be able to facilitate, to be able to chair, to be able to speak on panels and keynote while still being able to do research and policy and all of this work all together. It's just who I am, except now you can see it laid out in clear form.
Well, it's an incredible website, and it really it provides a visual of everything we've talked about today. Folks, who check it out, NEPENEK.ca. It's incredible. Your leadership always seems grounded in relationships rather than titles. And when you think about your ancestors and the generations still to come, what legacy are you hoping to leave?
I'll speak to both sides of my family because that's how we work in our cultures. So on one side of my family, Cora Wells, Daniel Wells are my great grandparents. Eleanor Wells is my late grandmother, and Leilani Riley is my mother. And I have such a beautiful family on that side. It wasn't until recently I actually got to sit down with one of our leaders from Lilwat, and they were explaining to me how we used to govern ourselves, because I asked them, what does sovereignty mean to us? Like, how did we used to work? What did my great grandparents do? And they explained that the way that our system works as Lilwat, as Stalium, is that each family has a responsibility. So our family, as the Wells family, commonly known now as the Wells family, is the hosts. We are the ones to share a meal and gather people and be the ones to ensure that conversation is flowing through good times and good food and good laughter and sometimes tears. That is the legacy of our family. That's what I'm carrying forward. And I'm never going to stray away from that responsibility. And I can see that in the work that I'm doing. I love being a host. I love talking with people and ensuring people feel safe in their ability to laugh and to cry and to share emotions. And I also love eating, and I love cooking, and I love being the one to help feed people and make sure that they're not hangry in these major discussions, and to just simply allow people the space to communicate. That's my job. That's my responsibility. That's who I hold myself to be from that side of the family. You switch over to my other side of my family, my dad's side. So I have more recently late Benjamin Paul and Evelyn Paul, and then as well as that, my grandmother Iona Paul and my dad Joseph Paul, and my papa Alec Dam. Now, from this side of my family, who has so many more other nieces, nephews, cousins, relatives, I have 8 siblings overall, but the responsibility somehow is also cooking. So my family is great cooks. We serve hundreds of people at a time. And along with that responsibility as cooks, we also are the ones as Coast Salish people, and especially as women, to be the ones to hold on to our stories, hold on to our lineage, hold on to our songs and our dances to ensure that our protocols are being followed. That's another part of me that I consider to be true to my spirit and my soul, is the caretaker of this knowledge, the one that's going to be able to hold on to this knowledge and not be selfish with it, because we're not selfish people. We share. So the responsibility as a Homosleni, as a woman of this land, as a Coast Salish woman, is to be the caretaker of the songs, languages, cultures, stories, food recipes, and pass that down to the next generation. It's always about what we do now to sustain our ability to live freely that will protect that same right for the next generation. That's the legacy of Zapyapolit, Wiltshire sauce, NEPENEः. That's our legacy, is the protection of who we are. So that way everyone can enjoy the beauty of our Chachats Nawayeth, of our sacred teachings, our knowledge, our protocols, our laws, because we have so much to give. So much was attempted to be stolen from us as First Nations peoples. But we're so rich. We're so rich in who we are because we hold teachings inside of us that could have never been stripped away from us through residential school or through the 60s scoop. And even now, with the common day systemic barriers that we face to try and break us down, we're strong. We are independent and self-determining, and we're so beautiful and so funny. Our uncles and our aunties and our grandmas and our grandfathers, our parents, have so many stories to tell that allow us to understand who it is that we have to be. Those are the legacies that our family lives through. We act them out right now. It's not a legacy to be spoken about in the future or in the past. You continue the legacy through the way in which you act now.
I'd love to kind of end this where we began, thinking about that little girl, the one who simply wanted to be safe. If she could see you today, what do you hope she'd recognize?
Smile. No matter what, all of us have the ability to share joy, love, happiness, kindness, respect, and honor. That little girl would see a smile and know that it was her. Know that there was some bright future somewhere. Because I shouldn't be alive, according to statistics. The best thing is that if some super alternative timeline occurred and she can, time travel, she'd be able to find me because I'd still be with family, a right that we have been given because our ancestors fought for our children to stay with our family. She would be able to find me because I now have a voice and I use it very proudly, very loudly. If anybody ever has the chance to hear me sing in a space, you'll get goosebumps. Some people cry. And that's because I'm not afraid to use my voice anymore. I use that spirit of that little girl who still exists inside of me today, the fear that once resided in my soul to even open my mouth to speak out against harm. I use it every single time I speak now to ensure that people feel my words, not just hear them, but you have to feel them in order to understand them. Feel the vibrations of the ways in which I sing and understand that never is going to go away.
Katisha, it's been an absolute honor to have this conversation with you today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Of course. Thank you so much, Cookston, for all of the time that we have spent talking, getting to know one another, sitting around, and enjoying each other's stories. You've allowed me to share pieces of myself that a lot of people don't have an understanding about. And, I never thought that I would be able to share those darker pieces of my history that now shape me today, because I've always actually felt ashamed of who that is, because she was quiet, and you've provided me with the ability to share why it is that I am the way that I am today.
I'm humbled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what a conversation. I'm incredibly grateful to Katisha Paul for her honesty, vulnerability, wisdom, and for sharing such deeply personal parts of her journey. From childhood survival to international advocacy, from Indigenous sovereignty and women's leadership to environmental stewardship and cultural resurgence, Katisha reminds us that leadership is ultimately rooted in relationship, responsibility, and action. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd encourage you to check out a few previous episodes that connect closely with many of the themes we explored today. First, listen to What Are You Willing to Lose? Settler Colonialism and Reconciliation with Dr. Tibitha Kimball, a thought-provoking conversation about reconciliation, power, and the realities of settler colonialism. You may also enjoy From Invisibility to Belonging, when Indigenous students finally feel seen, with Michaela Chi, Sonoy Raposo, and Abby Wolt, which explores indigenous identity, representation, belonging, and creating educational spaces where people can truly thrive. Another powerful companion episode is Raven Lacerte, Ending Gender-Based Violence One Conversation at a Time. Raven's work addressing gender-based violence and advocating for Indigenous women and girls echoes many of the issues Katisha spoke about today. And finally, check out Healing the Disconnect, Culture, Climate, and Community, which dives into the connections between culture, environmental stewardship, community, and well-being, themes that sit at the very heart of Katisha's work. You'll find links to all 4 episodes in the show notes. As always, thank you for listening to Behavior Speak. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who would benefit from hearing Katisha's story. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep moving the conversation forward.